So looking at all the avenues of traditional filmmaking, and a part of that is who you know. And that's why networking, I don't like doing it. I don't like having to go and try to meet someone, find out if I can trust them or what that relationship's going to be like. But it's so necessary because the more doors that you open, the better chance that you have of getting your movie financed.
Hello and welcome to Off the Lot. The film industry is changing fast, and if you want to make movies, it's time to become your own gatekeeper. If you've got a vision and the drive to make it happen, this podcast is for you.
We're your hosts, Ken Kabatov and Anthony Epp, and every week we dive into the hustle, challenges, and real-world strategies of independent filmmaking. We talk to directors, producers, and industry pros about what it really takes to get your film made.
So if you're serious about making movies, hit follow or subscribe. It helps us keep this going. And if you like what you hear, spread the word, share the episode, leave a comment, and help more indie filmmakers find Off the Lot. Let's dive in. Today on Off the Lot, we're thrilled to welcome filmmaking duo Andrew Holmes and Austin Andrews, the creative minds behind the supernatural thriller The Island Between Tides, which is also called The Lost Daughter in the United States. Andrew Holmes is a Canadian director with an impressive range, from ghost stories to documentaries about action stars like Dolph Lundgren. He's worked with Hollywood talents including Nicolas Cage and Wesley Snipes, always bringing his signature attention to detail and authentic storytelling approach.
Austin Andrews brings daytime Emmy award-winning editing skills to this partnership, earning his statue for Netflix's Julie and the Phantoms. His editing on Sundance hits like Summer of '84 and award-winning short films have established him as a true visual craftsman. Their latest film, The Island Between Tides, follows a young woman who visits a mysterious island only to return and discover that 25 years have passed in the world she left behind. I had the immense pleasure of working on this film with Andy and Austin, and I can't wait for everyone to see it and to chat about it today. Austin and Andy, welcome to Off the Lot.
Thanks for having us, guys, and glad that you looked back onto our filmmaking process as a pleasure. That's nice to hear.
This is honestly, and I'll preface this by without any flattery, unnecessary flattery, I should say. Working with you guys on Island Between Tides was actually one of my most favorite filmmaking experiences. So I will caveat that. So that's
nice
a good way to set the interview.
Yeah, it was a very challenging shoot. Obviously, we probably still both carry some trauma from embarking on the idea to shoot a movie up in Prince Rupert, to bring a bunch of other crazy filmmakers to the northern part of BC to help us try to achieve making a movie up there. It was not easy, as you know.
Yeah, so we'll take that as a double compliment, knowing what we all went through. That truly felt like we were, in the trenches together.
Yeah, going to war together sometimes brings people together and creates sort of this memory of an experience that, while traumatizing and you wouldn't plot this out and go the exact route again necessarily, but you have a lot of fun things to talk about later. And isn't that what filmmaking is all about?
I think there's 1,000 different things that we do differently, will do differently on the next one. And I think that's the whole point. You can only speak to your experiences of how they went when you're doing something, and you can think you have some bright ideas. And we thought we had a lot of really bright ideas, and not just like creative, but ultimately speaking to production and how to execute. And eventually you have to let go of your thoughts of control on that and let your collaborators help you with that. And that can be a very good thing, or it can be a not so good thing. So that's lots of lessons learned. And that's the whole point to us, is like every single time you do it, it gets a little bit easier. And every single time you do it, you learn lessons so you don't make those mistakes.
Yeah.
Because you will make mistakes.
Well, it's such an important trust exercise too. And I think for Andy and I, we tend to go to great detail in our prep. And, we'll spend, just as a byproduct of making a movie, it takes so long to get the pieces together to make it, that, there's a lot of idle time when time is cheap, when it's just the two of us getting together and, working out what our shot lists are and devising things for, what are all the possible things that could go wrong on the day. Of course, we only were able to anticipate about a third of those. Two-thirds of those are surprises or more. But to show up on the day and then at that point relinquish that, granular level of control where everything exists in such a perfect way in your head, and relinquish that to your collaborators. I found actually that may be easier than expected, but depends on, of course, the collaborator. Always does.
Andy, you seem to have a different opinion of that.
I think that we were very, very fortunate to have incredible collaborators on this movie and such. And I think what it gets interesting is, Austin saying relinquishing that control and having that trust in them. The trust had to be earned by anyone who you work with. And I think sometimes there's decisions that are made, especially we wore a lot of hats on this movie, as you know, Anthony, and from writing to directing to producing. And Austin and I have always kind of joked, like, taking a producing credit on an independent film that you directed is a bit of a joke, because if you're directing an independent film, you're producing an independent film. How often are people directing $3 million indie that they did not have major components of financing it or getting it into production? You are a producer if you're directing. And the reason why we decided to take a producing credit on this film is that the genesis started with us. So not just writing a script, but putting together the financing, seeing that through, bringing in the producing partners that we had, and Matt Servey and Amber Ripley and Josh Husiliak, who was a huge part of us, again, putting this all together. So it's not so much that angle where I kind of chuckle at it, but it's decisions by your team, your crew, that you'll see get made. And that's your job as a director, saying someone may make a decision and you look at it and say, well, that's the wrong decision. And sometimes you discover that because of how busy you are, or, you're shooting a movie in 23 days, you find out just before you're about to shoot. And that happened a bunch of times. And, fortunately for us, there's two of us. So Anthony, as you're aware, there was kind of this ability for us to divide and conquer. And we still didn't feel like we had enough time to approach the issues with the cast and the creative on the day, because we're dealing with so much of the other components. So sometimes, because we have such a great collaboration, Austin and I don't know how directors don't have a directing partner very often, because I just don't know how they have the time to deal with everything. And we're very fortunate that way, that we're able to kind of navigate the landscape together.
What I found very interesting about the whole process, and this started in prep, I mean, quite obviously, and well before prep, like years before prep, but the preparation of sort of discussing all of the nuances, and from shot listing to just location planning and everything else, logistics and creative elements of planning ahead of time. Obviously, it has to stand the test of the day itself. So they always say in football, like you prep all week, and then you spend the first 2 minutes of the game going to school and figuring out what the other team prepped. And that's kind of like what I felt this film was about, was like there was so much well thought out prep going into it, that when we hit all of those, many of which unforeseen circumstances, like the just stuff that came up that you couldn't have written down and said, oh yeah, well, in case of this, let's do this. We were in a position to go, okay, let's pivot, let's move, let's do something, let's find another solution, even if it means moving to a whole new location that we don't have.
Yeah, I think we, without that prep, and Austin and I benefit from working together now for 13 years, that before something happens, I know how Austin will react, he'll know how I'll react, we'll know what our opinions are most of the time of what we should do. And so a lot of those decisions can be made independently, but without doing the work. And I mean, I think everyone looks at filmmaking a little bit differently. Like, some people look at it like, when you get on set, that's when the movie's made, like we're getting our hands on it. But that's really the execution of the work that you've done before. So yes, the writing is a big part of it, but all of the discussions of what you're going to do when you're going to execute are the most important discussions. And we had a lot of chances to discuss that with Anthony, with you, Anthony, and Danny, and our production designer.
That way.
And for the most part, the key creatives on our movie were already up to speed by the time we got onto set. And I don't think a lot of people necessarily get that luxury.
Well, and that was us trying to be as transparent as possible with our intentions and as communicative as possible. We would share our storyboards every day as part of the package that would go out in the nightly emails about what's being shot the next day. All of our shot lists were public. We didn't always have the time to do all the shots on our shot list, but there was an understanding with all of our crew that they could also come to either of us with a question. We wouldn't almost ever need to consult the other person, because we had done all of this prep for a good reason. We had the same intentions and the same idea and the same vision in mind for all of these scenes. And that was what we were working up through the writing process. Would have been different had we not written this film together and gone through as many drafts as we did. We often would still be doing the same scene together. We only had one camera team. There were a couple of moments where we split up, but I would be, maybe prepping the next scene or already blocking the next scene, and Andy would be finishing the current scene, and we'd get together after being separated for 45 minutes and talk about what we'd each done. And I always found those so delightful. Like, those were some of my favorite sessions. What decisions got made, how did things turn out? And then there'd be sort of a sharing of things that I found very energizing. And that's a great thing about being in a collaboration like this.
we also, when we write, we don't want to write a novel when you're writing a script. In my opinion, the script's more of a blueprint than something that someone's going to sit down, light a candle and have a scotch and read your script. And I know a lot of writers look at that like this should be extremely readable. Austin's one of those. He writes all of the prose. And a lot of the time, if we have details that we want to be in the movie, but at script writing level, it doesn't make sense to include that on the page. And so that would inform, for the easiest term possible, our director's notes. And inside of our director's notes, it's an accompanying document that would go along with the script that we could share these thoughts with people, saying this may be a 1/8 of a page action line. But realistically, that 1/8 of a page has been talked about for hours upon hours, and we know exactly what we want to do with it. And you're not talking about prep as if it's this thing that only we do. Everyone preps on their film, but I think it comes down to the fact that we felt the most comfortable putting more work into the prep because we knew, and this comes from the experience that we have done. I've produced a handful of feature films before where things and locations fell apart and it doesn't go the way that you want. And sometimes when you're writing something saying like, how are we going to achieve what we want to do? What happens if we can't achieve what we want to do? And one of the things that we were working against on Island Between Tides, transparently, was our camera team was not able to shoot as quickly as we wanted to. And we were working with great professionals that worked on a different cadence than what we worked on. And what we had worked on was either micro low budget films like Lord Jones is Dead that we shot in South Africa, where it was really like as true micro low budget indie filmmaking as you get to, I produced a feature film directed by Jesse James Miller called Rabbit, which was the same thing. These group of 3 filmmakers, Ken, Jesse, and Bruce, who knew exactly what they wanted to do. And we were shooting, probably 35, 40 setups in a day because the actors were on the same page as the cinematographer. The director knew what he wanted. And so we were able to move at a cadence on those films very differently. Now you get into, it's kind of that more money, more problems kind of thing. People may have perceived our production as being less indie than it was. And that ultimately led to a detriment of how many setups. I remember in our pre-production meeting, Anthony, you're saying you guys have 24, 25 setups planned for this day. I think you're going to get 12. You were much more accurate in what we actually got. And that's coming from your experience of working with this style of crew. But for us, that's really frustrating when we're going like, okay, if we call cut, we don't need everyone to rush in and start chatting and pull out their phones. We can call cut and we can get going right away. And, that happened on our first and second day in a huge way where we shot, 2 of the biggest scenes in the movie on day 1 and day 2, just out of logistics of how the schedule was. And people were kind of looking at us wide-eyed saying like, why is this so frantic? Well, we have 5 minutes before lunch to get 2 more takes of the scene, and the scene runs 6 minutes. So now we're in grace on the very first day, which is not a situation we want to be in, but the end goal is not to eat lunch. The end goal is to get our scene. And I think the disconnect between servicing a film production, if you're working on a show, compared to directing it, you can't. You're not talking the same language. Our goal was to get those scenes. The goal of the grip on set is to get his lunch because he's hungry. And so trying to get everyone to buy in. By the time you finish filming, everyone's got the same goal in mind. Yeah. We're speaking the same language, but those challenges come up. And if you don't know what you want to do, you're in real trouble. And, when you have a producer hat on at the same time, you're thinking, well, we got this huge loan for our tax credits. We got this private equity that we have to do. We have to deliver this movie at the best that we can. And you're thinking of that all while trying to execute on your prep. So
and manage personalities.
And it's a difficult thing to do.
Isn't that such a huge part of the job that nobody really talks about too much, which is like the technical part of directing is already hard enough, right? Making the movie and telling the story in this beautiful way and figuring out your plan, that's so hard to begin with. But the management element of it is just a whole other level of it, right? And it gets in the way constantly. And you have to be able to be a good manager as a director as well.
And some directors actually make that harder too. There's so many different things that can weigh on that too. But just thinking of, yes, how impossible and how miraculous it is that anything gets made ever. And how, it requires all of your powers of empathy, compassion, understanding, patience, being able to meet other people on their level. And that's the nature of being in a high pressure, intense environment, making movies with others who don't see the world the same way as you, or don't see their job the same way as you. And what's to say one is better than the other, you know?
Well, it's a team sport, right? Like in hockey, you're dealing with 20 personalities, right, on the ice, and or in a game situation, and there's a fourth liner and a first liner, and everybody's got what their role is. And sometimes as a director, you let your team, do what they do best at the pace they need to do it. And sometimes you have to sit there and go, look, we need more from you on your side, or we need a little bit more juice on from the AD, for example, or something like that. Like we need you to push the pace a little bit more, because even though, yes, this is the pace, we need you to push the pace higher, because we need this to happen on our end in a more effective way. And I'm not throwing myself under the bus. I'm just saying, like, that's kind of like the role of the director is to know which levers to pull and when to pull them, and with the idea that, look, the objective here is to make a really good movie and to make the best movie we can with the resources we have. But that doesn't mean resting back on the resources that you are being told you've been given. It means pushing those to the boundary as much as you can.
I think the analogy that you brought in before of sports goes hand in hand with filmmaking. And I look at, I have a sports background, and I look at being a director as being the head coach, and the producer being the general manager, and your lead actor being the captain of the team. Every one of those components, it all starts with assembling your team and curating your collaborators, and which is, in my opinion, the most important part of filmmaking beyond the creative. Because you can have the best creative, but if you don't have the right collaborators or the people that are on the same page, it's not going to work out for you at all. Unless you have an endless budget and you're fine with burning money, it's never going to work out. And I think what we've realized, we've always had a no assholes rule. We want to work with people that we like. At Cryptic screening last night, how many familiar faces did we get to see that worked on that movie, that worked on our movie, that worked on Amber's previous movie, that worked on one of our previous ones? The best people keep getting brought forward. And Linklater talked about it in a documentary, which I loved. It is this idea of atmosphere. And so when you were filmmaking with 35 millimeter film, when the film's rolling, everyone's kind of focusing. It's like, the puck has been dropped and now it's our turn to go score a goal. And going to digital, there is this kind of newfound ability to not be as careful and not be as precious as the time.
Yeah, looseness.
Just because there's no film being running doesn't mean that anything has changed. And he talks about building that atmosphere of focus. And obviously someone like James Cameron talks about it a lot, where, if you're on his working set with a cell phone, he'll nail gun it to a wall. As much as I'd love to do that, I don't think that's the atmosphere as a head coach, is, ruling with an iron fist. But I think, it's our job to motivate everyone to be on the same page with the end goal in sight. And if everyone's working together that way, then we have less of a thing to worry about, or we don't have to consider every single potential thing that could go wrong. We know that we have our AD that's going to be putting out fires. We know that our production designer is getting ahead of something. We know costumes are going to be working. We know that continuity is good. So then we can kind of release that from the back of our minds and focus on what's going to be going on the camera. But it comes down to bringing the people in that are cool with building that atmosphere. The more structured and the more disciplined that your atmosphere is on set, the better product will be. So yes, we want to check our Instagrams. We want to communicate with the wife back home. We want to be connecting with everyone while we're working. But if we can get the mindset to say, for the next 12 and a half hours or however long that we're working, that this is the single most important thing in our lives, we're going to come up with gold. Yeah. Now, you're not going to be able to get everyone to agree with that. Usually the actors are on board with that pretty quickly, because if they don't do their best job, they're going to be seen. They're going to be visible. Yeah. The first AC isn't on camera. So if their mind is somewhere else and they buzz a shot, or they're not quite paying attention and blocking to get the exact distance for a rack focus, well, when the movie comes out, we're probably going to pick the coverage that they're sharp in, and may not be the best take. So they don't really wear any of that. Yeah. So the actors are the first ones to set that tone. And
the heads of department too, that accountability from them.
Yeah, absolutely. And my final thought on that was really that if you're able to build that atmosphere and have everyone on the same page, you're now working together. And it's easier thing said than done.
And if it's not the most important thing while you're there making it, then why are you even there? And that's the case with a shoot like this, where we were all in Prince Rupert. No one, there were a few locals who we were lucky enough to be able to find and train and work with, which was just amazing. But almost everyone on the crew was from elsewhere, and it was a camp shoot. We were all there for the specific purpose of making this film. For the month and a half we were all there. That sort of, I guess, looseness again with purpose. It took a little while, definitely those first few days, before we'd found a way to really gel and mesh. And it was such a delight to see everyone buy in and recognize what we were there, and the tone that we were setting as directors, the commitment that we were bringing to it, and leading by example there. I think we made it pretty clear we expected that from the people we were working with too.
Had you worked with a lot of those crew members before, bringing them to Prince Rupert for that long, or were there a bunch of new players on the team?
I think mostly new.
Mostly new. There were a few who we handpicked,
both,
who we had worked with on past productions or we'd heard great things about. The director of photography I've known since I was 20, and I've always wanted to do something with him. And Andy's now known him for a number of years too. And someone who we just really wanted to work with. But most of, especially the non-key creatives, there were very few who we had worked with before. And we just had to trust the keys for the people who they were bringing in, that they were the right people.
Yeah, and that's a part of, I think it's the biggest detriment to independent film in the West Coast in particular, is that we have a booming service industry where, the people that we would ideally want to work with, and the people that maybe we've worked on with one show and we're like, this guy's a rock star. We want to bring him in. Well, he's making $1,200 a day on The Last of Us. And we're now asking him to leave his cushy job that's shooting for 6 to 7 months to come up to Prince Rupert to make a quarter of that money. We're not going to get that. And not saying that the people that we had didn't also do that, but it's the fact that when you're making independent film, you're pulling from a different pool when you live in a service area. And, unfortunately, the town's slow right now, and those people are going to be more readily available. But through our production, we could name 20 people that would be our first call going on to the next movie. We saw Gareth yesterday. Gareth came in as a backup goalie to keep the sports analogy going, as a gaffer. And, I think he's worked on at least 3 or 4 productions.
He came in as an e-bug.
Yeah.
Just the last minute there.
Yeah.
Emergency backup goalie.
And man, that's right. That's right. He wasn't the original gaffer, was he?
No, he sure wasn't.
I do remember that.
He was a rock star, and he's one of those guys that, every single time we see him, we just saw a short film that he DP'd for Crazy Eights. It's wild to see the fact that you could work with someone here and then see them move into another role. And yeah, no doubt in my mind, the first thing I said to Austin when we were talking about our crew afterwards, because again, a lot of shows were ramping up after we finished production because COVID was kind of ending, and we gave a lot of recommendations to people like Gareth, and looking at saying like, I don't think he'll be available for us next time that we want to shoot because he'll be in such high demand, which is great. That's what you want for people in your crew, to be climbing the ladder and working on big things. But our independent industry in the West Coast is dominated by the television service industry. And yes, you're somewhat playing the same sport, but it's done differently. And you can't approach independent film with the same way that you would approach shooting a TV show. Just coming down to the time and the money spent. We don't have money to throw at problems. Amber Ripley was, our savior on this movie, because she would stop the spending that we didn't know was happening, because people were just saying, well, we have this problem, money, money, money. And for us, when you don't have money, you have time. We had all of this time to prep beforehand, but now we're in production. You don't have time and you don't have money. Now that takes critical thinking. And how does that do? And we approved, we went way over budget on this production because we're shooting up in Prince Rupert. But that critical thinking and those key collaborators that we're bringing in are the ones that are ultimately going to save your production.
Like a Gareth or somebody like that, who you bring in and they rock star it on that one production, and they maybe work on a couple. But it's also important then to foster that atmosphere of, like, again, sports analogy, but the farm system of just saying, okay, that once that person becomes a gaffer, now it's really important to see who they bring in as their best electrics, or as their team down the line, because those people then become your gaffers on the next one, but you're getting the same vibe from them as you got from your original person.
As directors, it's honestly not something that we want to worry about.
As producers, you do, though.
As producers, we do. And, I've been fortunate enough to produce and PM on other people's shows. And that person management, crew management was my primary focus on a bunch of them. And it's very, very easy to identify the people that are going to be rock stars very early on, and identifying that work ethic and identifying those people. And very often they're not available for your next show because there's people with more money that are going to scoop them up and take them away from you, which is great. But in that independent film atmosphere, you have to be able to identify those people as a producer or production manager that are going to make your life easier. Yeah. That's what we want. Like, it's not even necessarily about being the best of the best. It's just, don't make our lives more difficult. And that's primarily what we're looking for. Deliver on the things that we're talking about, which everyone's capable of, and show up with a work ethic that, like Austin mentioned, to us, when you're producing an independent film, it is the most important thing that's going on in our lives at the time. Independent producers sacrifice so much to try to chase this dream of what they want to do, while the perspective of other people is, well, they're paying the rent. And every so often, those people overlap. And it's really great. Like, we don't expect people to work for free or to work as hard as us when we're not paying them. But when we're all approaching a film, again, in 24 days, we're going to come together and we're going to have this thing in the box. For those 24 days, all we ask is to show up and at least pretend like it's the most important thing to you on those days.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And all of this is just so great. And it's so true about just building your troupe, and moving forward and working with other filmmakers. Like, I'm sure, like Anthony's prepping a movie right now. I'm prepping a movie. You guys are prepping another movie. We're probably going to be working with the same people, and also being able to just recommend, certain key people to each other, and just working together as a community. I think it's just so important, because ultimately the difference is between what we're doing and a big studio feature is just the money. The conversations are the exact same. A wardrobe meeting is the exact same, whether it's a $200 million movie or a $2 million movie. It's just that one is going to take place in a big warehouse with a bunch of, designers and everything like that, and concept art, and one will be over Zoom because you don't have office space. But the creative conversations are still there. And so being able to work together as a community and pull this off, that's so smart, so cool.
Well, building a troupe, I think, is such a good, but we talk about that all the time. We also talk about that with actors who we like to work with over and over again, because, there's the trust out of the gate. There's the understanding of process, of method, of just what they bring to it, and being able to share that very special, ineffable kind of human connection, because the stuff you're exploring is rough muck of human nature. And when it's someone who you can trust to get their hands dirty and get into it in a way that becomes a really nice mirror to the people who are watching the film eventually, that's really special.
Yeah, I think too, the conversations of more people that you start to have that trust in. And Josh, our producer, is a great example of that. When we would come with, that hairy eyeball looking like, hey, we got a problem to solve, Josh would look back at you in your eyes. And, he was listening, and he was actually going to go and solve that problem, which was so nice, because all of the time you don't have that. And we were so lucky. Paloma is someone that we will look to work with again in the future, without a doubt. Like Anthony, some of the stuff that we were up against in timeframes and not able to deliver creatively, nearly exactly what we wanted. And that's why it took so long to find her. It's the gamesmanship of just being keen. Same with, I literally could say this about all of our cast, but Camille Sullivan was another one that we didn't have a ton of time to talk with her before the movie. We really primarily focused on bringing Paloma in for rehearsals with David, but Camille would come forward with really thoughtful ideas, and she would approach us right at the exact time. And that's just her being a vet. She's a veteran at doing it, and presented in a way that nearly, I would say 100% of the time, we said, yes, let's make these changes. And it's not the fact that we didn't want to have that conversation. It's the fact that she came forward at the right time with the right ideas and presented them. It was all perfect logic. And I think, the biggest thing that we can take away is when you bring in those people that are approaching it that way, it just makes everything so much easier, and you'll go back to them again and again and again. And cast comes down to that same thing, especially when you're coming into people that work in television too. When they come prepared, it just makes all the difference in the world. It's an interesting process of saying, hey, we have the studio system where they're spending a ton of money doing it. When you don't have time, or when you don't have money, you have the time, and those are those remote meetings. And because of, thankfully, a pandemic changed the way that we're able to connect the way we are now. It affords us a lot more time with FaceTime and getting your hands in the dirt and playing around. And there's something that is missed a little bit about being in the same room. Anthony, I think back to us prepping the schedule in that conference room for hours upon hours. And sometimes you feel like there is no solution to what we're doing, but if you spend enough time, you're going to start to create those together. And that's really what this is all about. Is it's not rocket science to go make a movie. The toughest part is getting it financed. Everyone's got great ideas. Everyone knows other people that you want to go make movies with, but coming up with those solutions, it just takes time and thoughtfulness.
Yeah, there was a reason that it was, what was it, like 8 years between our previous film and that one.
Well, let's talk about that. So your previous film was...
It's a micro-budget media satire comedy that we shot in Johannesburg called Lord Jones is Dead, based on a play. Actually, now both our features are based on plays, but with very different kind of approach. We spent twice as long rehearsing it with our cast than we did actually shooting that film.
Yeah, nearly 3 times as long.
Yeah. And that was, weeks, to the point where we had as our goal, by the day one of production, we could either turn left and drive to a live theater and perform it as a play, or we could turn right and drive to our set in Brixton and shoot it as a film.
Oh, wow.
And that was sort of our methodology going in. It was one of our favorite collaborators from Vancouver who we brought down as the co-lead alongside 2 great South African actors. That one was, in a large way, a proof of concept for Andy and I working together.
I mean, there's some really great stories.
So many.
What's funny is that we, like Austin said, it was micro low budget. We were spending money of our own pocket. We mitigated the production. Darren Benning, our financier on Island Between Tides, was our primary financier on Lord Jones is Dead. We had a television pre-sale through Super Channel, which, it's one of our favorite Canadian broadcasters who work with. They do a lot of our documentaries. We had a pre-sale through them that was ready to go. They obviously had some problems as we were going through, so we actually lost a chunk of our financing. Darren still wrote us a check so we could go through. And what's so unfortunate in my mind is I look back to the production of Lord Jones, which was, I wouldn't say equally as difficult as IBT, but it was so fun. Everything about the process was enjoyable, and not a lot about making IBT was enjoyable. And a part of that was that the stakes were so much lower because we were essentially playing around. We didn't have nearly as much money on the line. We weren't trying.
Well, can I ask, like, ballpark budget?
150?
Yeah, I would say we spent $150,000, and we didn't really have a line producer. There's another movie that we that we directed and produced, and when there was stuff that came up, we just take it out of our pocket. There wasn't like an official budget or a cost report at the end of it where we could go forward.
Yeah. We knew, like 5% the budget of Island Between Tides.
We knew that we had to pay back Darren the money that he spent, and we were going to get majority of that from the television broadcast. And
once you were moving pieces too, IBT had 27 locations. Lord Jones is Dead had 1. Yeah. And had a cast of 3, not 30.
And this is where I was kind of smiling when we were laughing at it. So the whole genesis of this idea was I was working for Sepia Films at the time, and Austin was cutting some of their projects. And I got emailed very randomly. I was first ADing a music video for a friend, and the producer of that music video wrote me and said, "Hey, do you want to AD a movie for Uwe Boll?" And I was like, "I can run a set. I don't know enough about running a film set." She's like, "Well, it's going to be a little bit different. We're going to shoot this in 6 days. It's primarily one location." There was more than one location, but she kind of painted in a way like, you can get through this. From what I've heard about you and what you did on the music video, you're going to be able to do this. And the content of the movie, I didn't love. It wasn't something that I really wanted to do. And then talking to Austin, he was like, "You should do this." But the primary thing is they're going to shoot it in 6 days. And a lot of it was going to be improvised. They had an outline kind of, it was like shooting an episode of Curb Your Enthusiasm, from what I understand.
There's a lot of explosions and stunts, and there's all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, there was a lot going on. And ultimately Austin talked me into it, and I took the time off of work to go do it. And I came out with these great stories of, working with Lachlan Monroe and seeing this guy who had done all sorts of huge projects before to
love Lachlan.
Now, he was incredible, and he was someone that I had watched a lot before. And I'm in the movie. Uwe Boll kills me. It's one of those things where it was this real kind of that independent spirit of making it. And I came back with all these stories, and I told Austin, we shot in 6 days. We got it all done. In fact, we wrapped like half a day early from
That's
main
crazy.
Unit.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, that shooting style was mostly steady cam. The DP that I can't remember his name now, German cinematographer that worked with Uwe, was a miracle worker, and the crew was all on board to just get it done as quickly as possible. The special effects crew withdrew resetting the squibs and everything like that was insanely quick. And, we blew up a car and we had, people falling down staircases, and it came down to coming back to Austin with those stories of what we did in 6 days. And so his idea, I didn't even know this. He was like, I think we can shoot Lord Jones in 6 days. And that whole genesis of it, which I didn't do the math until later, was he heard my stories of shooting Uwe's movie in 6 days. So we can do this in 6 days. So that's how we structured it. And, we got bang for buck. The same reason why so many productions go to other countries is, you can pay your crew slightly less money for the day's work. So we had a fully functioning film crew for 6 days on our budget, and we scheduled the whole film for all of the morning scenes were going to be filmed in the mornings of those 6 days, all of the evening scenes, because the movie takes place over a course of one day. And it scheduled out just perfectly. And we got really lucky in many cases. And we did our first kind of splinter unit where we ended up dividing and conquering with 2 cameras at one point. But just like everything else, a Steadicam dropped on the road and we had to spend, an hour rebuilding the camera. At one point, the sun wasn't right. So we had to sit down and wait for the sun to move.
To say nothing of how the movie's set during the hottest day of the year in Johannesburg. And we were shooting in the middle of winter. And the first couple hours every day, we were seeing the actor's breath. And so we'd often have to shoot shots that wouldn't feature that, or tell them, just don't exhale too much as you're saying your line.
Give them a cold drink that would cool down their breath. So their breath would be the same temperature as the outside air kind of thing.
Yeah, oh my gosh. If I remember correctly, they all have like rolled up sleeves and things like that. Like they definitely, I didn't guess that was shot in winter. That's funny.
Feels like summer. It feels hot. That's testament to our amazing colorist.
Well, it works that all the grass is dead and it looks like it hasn't rained in forever. And
that's right.
At the very end, the very opening of the movie, they're getting rained on and they're hiding from the rain. And so, Chad Krochuk, who's an amazing production designer, but also our lead actor, built us a rain tower so we could do that. But those guys had to endure, 2 minutes of rain falling on their heads in this really cold way. And it was cold. Like it was, when you think of Africa, you don't think of how cold it could get. But I think there's a picture on my IMDb where I'm like wearing a scarf and like 3 layers of Blue Jays, like warm up windbreaker, which was like the warmest thing I had. We were not prepared for how cold it was, but all of those things, all of those curveballs, it didn't feel like the level of what we were doing with, again, had those stakes in it. So for us working as directors, it was such a good litmus test of, is this going to work?
How does the other person function under great pressure? Are they solutions oriented, like what we were just talking about with Josh, where, it's not woe is us. However, will we do this? Oh, we're such victims. Yeah. And so many people, that's the first place that they go. And I think something we both appreciate so much about the other person is, okay, well, what do we have to do to get the essence of what this is supposed to accomplish? If we have to pivot or do a quick rewrite on the fly, here's the story point that we need to communicate. Here's what needs to come across. It's not going to be quite how we wanted it to be. Well, let's make the most of it. And when you make the most of it, let's say 2 times out of 5, it actually ends up being better. 2 times out of 5, it ends up being sort of net neutral. And then 1 time out of 5, it's a setback. Yeah.
Well, and then the other side of that is having the confidence in the story you're trying to tell, but also the confidence in each other to take a breath for like 3 minutes, step back for a second and go, okay, this is what we've been presented with. Let's figure out a solution. Let's not react and let's not panic. Let's figure out a solution and go. And then just go with like, basically just drive full speed into that solution. You can't just sit there and go, okay, oh crap, let's just let's just cancel the day. It's like you have to sit there and go, all right, well, we're here. Who do we have? What can we do? Where can we go next? Or can we go to other places within the area or something to get this day done and still make something usable? That's the sort of survival, but also how can we get the most out of this? Like, can we turn this into a win for us?
Yeah. And that all comes back down to the prep as well. Like our actors on Lord Jones, like Austin mentioned, we rehearsed like crazy and they brought their A game to the point where I think our longest take was 18 minutes.
Oh yeah, that's right. That one scene that was our amazing DP Trevor Calverley's pitch to us was, let's just do this as a oneer. And we're like,
He brought that up through watching rehearsals, and because we rehearsed and blocked in the actual location. So he saw that their ability to deliver like a play, and he came up with that. And we were talking about key collaborators. We had Chris, our Steadicam operator, was a monster.
We tried bringing him over to Prince Rupert for this movie.
Yeah, and same with our first AC was an absolute monster. Jacob was just, those guys were so good at what they did that we were able to do 2 takes of an 18-minute scene, and that scene was scratched off the list. We got it done. And those are the kind of people that, because the actors did the work, they didn't have to reset, or say if they mumbled one line or they changed the word, it didn't really matter because the essence was getting across. That all of their preparation made our lives so much easier because the actors were ready to go. Jacob never missed focus at one point, and the Steadicam operating was at the highest level possible.
And so instinctive. And, even when it wasn't necessarily exactly what we would have, like we're looking at the monitors where we have looked, we suddenly see why his instinct brought him there, and then, finding somewhere else. And it's like, oh yeah, that's cool. Valid decision, not necessarily the one we would have made in the moment, but one that in recognition we look back on as like, that was the right decision. And thinking of, in terms of like that solutions oriented approach, one of the things that I think of so often in working with Andy is how there would be moments where I would end up feeling like a colossal setback. One of those being the island day when, we had such a precise idea for how this path that Lily walks across to the island, this tidal path and the rocks that she hops across. Well, we lost our tidal window and we didn't get that. And I was so shattered. And, I think tensions were all quite high in that exact moment. And that's when Andy comes in. It's like, okay, no, let's solve this. And as soon as, it's okay, well, let's put on our solutions hat. Well, then I'm in that place now too. And I think we can act as that for each other. And that's so essential. Even when you naturally have that disposition, which I believe we both do, it's not always going to be the case in every moment. Oh my God, this location that we're shooting at right after lunch isn't dressed yet. What are we going to do? There's no good to point fingers or lay blame, especially if that comes down to communication. Oh, let's spend our lunch dressing that set instead.
Eating lunch and you dress the set yourself and have the crew look at it when they're done eating and make it better. I feel the exact same way. It's like there's so many times where you just have to relinquish that and take advantage of working with good people.
With Islands, you guys did have some rehearsal time with the actors, but not probably as much as you would have liked, I imagine, right? How do you, in an ideal situation on an independent film sort of schedule, how do you take that time to work with the actors when everybody else is demanding your time?
That was my favorite part of the whole process on this, was the rehearsal.
So to take a step back, we cast Paloma very late. We did a huge search for her. We looked through Vancouver. We looked down to the States. We looked to the UK, 2,500 submissions. We found Paloma quite late. And we knew that David was going to play Jared. It was somewhat written for him. And he was keen to get up to Prince Rupert. And Paloma, I think she got on the ferry the next day after we offered her the job. She had
maybe a week and a half out.
She had to get some stuff covered with her housekeeping at home. But we spent the primarily of our time knowing the toughest, most emotional scenes for not just blocking, but for them to get to where they needed to be. And we focused on those big scenes.
Those are days 1 and 2 of production too.
Yeah. And I don't even know if we knew that at that time, what our schedule was going to be. But ultimately, that rehearsal saved us on those days where we literally were, we had 2 takes of one of the most emotional beats in the entire movie. And that rehearsal saved it. And if we could, it's one of those things where you want to try to get as much rehearsal as possible. But again, bringing that independent spirit to what's going on. The actors want to look good. They want to sound good. And unless they're a big star cast, they're going to afford you that time where you're not paying them to rehearse with their scene partner. And again, however you want to dance around the union, paying them for rehearsal time, they're most likely going to buy in, and you can have those conversations with them, and they can rehearse on their own, or however you want to structure it. You look at that, and whoever's going to buy in and whoever's going to afford you that time, you got to take advantage of it, and you have to utilize it. And I think casting realistically is the most important part of this, because we knew that Paloma didn't need a lot of notes on her approach to the character. We saw that through her auditions. We knew we were casting the right person. Same with David. He had such great ideas. So we didn't have to have these big, long conversations with him. We did have several conversations with both of them about what our intention was.
Especially walking through the scene, the script, which, the character of Lily in the film is a very particular type of way of seeing the world because of the island's influence. And so we had to sort of find and get to that place together in part. And, that was just such a satisfying part of the process, those discussions, the way that we would, we rented out the theater space in Prince Rupert and just use that as our space, and, use the tables to set the parameters or the boundaries for the room. And, well, this is over there, this is over there, this is over there. And I think of even, Andy and I, our next project that we're writing right now is written in a large part to, bring some of those lessons from Island Between Tides. Large parts of it are a two-hander, and there's sort of 4 main characters in the whole thing, and geared very much toward being able to get to that place in rehearsal in a way back to what we did with Lauren Joseph's Dead.
And I mean, you look at the casting of the other characters, we had a pretty big cast on IBT, and there's a lot of people that were just doing scenes with Paloma. Obviously, it's kind of her adventure. And so, we couldn't realistically rehearse on that schedule with what we're doing with Paloma scene with Gabrielle Rose. We just didn't have the time for it at that point.
And Gabrielle was in Vancouver and we were up in Prince Rupert.
Yeah. And so we were able to have a table read with everyone that we knew that was cast. And there's a couple placeholder people that were in there. And so you can't necessarily rehearse everything, and you don't need to rehearse everything, in my opinion. There is something that really comes nice out of discovery on the day and getting initial instincts, and when you cast the right people, that's what happens. But would have loved more time to spend with Camille beforehand, and fortunately she brought what we thought was a picture perfect performance, and we got lucky with that because we had never worked with her before. We did our due diligence and we knew that she could really bring it, but we got fortunate in the fact that we ended up casting someone who was awesome.
Well, that was Amber having just done a movie with her as well, and that was the case with so many of our cast and crew. It's people who we trusted, they trusted them. It's like trust one degree removed, and so therefore
they
it's
knew,
like trust proxy.
They knew what we were getting in for, and made sure that we weren't going to be put into a position of banging our heads against the wall. And the toughest cast member to work with obviously was the 3-year-old that just didn't want to listen.
God.
But that's a part of the adventure too. Now we know not to write in 3-year-olds into movies that have really tight shooting schedules.
Well, so this is so interesting. I mean, and just talking about things that work, things that didn't work, and what you're working on next. What are you adjusting for your next movie based on your experience with IBT? I mean, things that okay, we're never doing that again.
Well, there's 2 sides of that. There's the production side and logistics side, and then there's the storytelling side.
Yeah, I mean, Austin and I are naturally attracted to adventure. So, when we first did Lord Jones's Dead, we kind of set out this goal for us to direct a movie on every continent on the planet. And that's ultimately going to mean a camp shoot. So one of our movies is set in Svalbard archipelago north of Norway, in an abandoned Russian mining town. And, we did a lot of work to try to, with our producers to try to put that movie into a place where we could logistically, we're talking about bringing in a hotel ship, and not like a cruise ship, but like a ship that's meant for, remote work.
I mean, we were just talking about this right before recording this podcast was the latest developments in that project.
Yeah. And, we spent so much time, it was probably about 4 years of development on that movie, and another movie that was going to shoot in the South Okanagan, which was logistically very different than anything else. It was all set on a rock place. It's a rock climbing movie. And so we fortunately were approaching all of these movies and logistical problem solving to the point where that was a primary focus of how do we actually do this? How do we create this new language? How do you shoot a movie on the side of a rock wall that's going to feel like people are going to be interested the whole time? A lot tougher to move the camera. And that's obviously where we started working with Danny Lavoie, and really prepping that movie gave us the faith to offer him IBT without second guessing it whatsoever. But all of that work led into, okay, now we're going to do a camp shoot in Prince Rupert. This should be easy because we've had a lot of these discussions before, and obviously we learned that lesson. So on the production side of the next movie is going to be something where the setting and the crew and the logistics are going to be much more straightforward so that we can focus on the story, and the story itself is written in a way that we can control some more of those things.
Well, and the storytelling reflects those lessons from a logistical perspective, especially making sure that the budget is commensurate with the ambition and the scope, which it's funny when I first sort of pitched the broad strokes of what became Lord Jones's Island Between Tides to Andy. Part of that was, let's do something for $1 million. And that was pretty quick that was not going to be possible with what our ambitions were. The next one takes some of those lessons, but it also, from a storytelling perspective, we're able to recognize some of the things that we really struggled to get to a place where it felt right with Island Between Tides. A lot of that being how much complexity can particularly a genre film. It's very much a film of ideas. It's a film that sort of engages with viewers in a more cerebral way that isn't, dealing with things that aren't always inherently cinematic. And we had to find ways to make these cinematic. And I think with some of that, we really succeeded. And, others, I think we would take those lessons and maybe strip them back and get it to a place where it's more just about the emotions that come through from the relationships between the characters, the sort of power plays and dynamics between them, and maybe less about the cerebral, external, extrinsic.
The puzzle making of it all, like the sort of like we want everybody to think about this, and rather as opposed to that, you want people to experience it or to feel it or to ride a roller coaster with you. Does that make sense, or is that
Yeah, well, it's also the approach to the market, which I think independent filmmakers don't
Has to be
necessarily.
informed by,
Yeah.
even if it's not specifically for the market. It has to be this sort of dance where ultimately it's something that, because it's a bold story being told well, being the goal, people will just respond to it.
And I don't necessarily think, from the films that I watch, that filmmakers are always thinking about the market, because you have this idea and you're going to bring it to life and you believe in it. And that was definitely us. But the market dictates whether you're going to be able to make your next movie, especially if you're playing on a certain level of stage and people are giving you very real money. So, Island Between Tides blended genres. And, sometimes we'd get the feedback from, big film festivals, which we're very fortunate to get the feedback from, that this wasn't horror enough for the midnight screenings, but it was too scary for the regular program. And we were kind of caught in between kind of two zones there. And, a big focus of ours going into the recut of Island Between Tides, because we ended up recutting the movie, Anthony, as you know, the movie that is presented now is very different than the script that was written. Looking forward, we're saying, okay, well, now let's make sure that we're more so in a specific lane, and we're trying to achieve one thing rather than trying to achieve two things, which is, Island Between Tides is a family story. It's a drama at heart. And, when you're finished watching it, you're saying, yes, this was spooky, but the characters are just spooking each other. The ghosts were haunting each other. And I think with the new approach, the two biggest things that we can focus on is spending our money on cast really effectively. And we loved our cast on IBT. Donald Logue was one of the very first Canadian names that we brought up of saying, this is who we'd like to be in our movie. And he was in the movie. But we do recognize that if you're able to take the money that you have, spend it audaciously, get a cast member that is going to excite the market, you're going to be able to create a lot more buzz and attention for your film just based off that name. And I know that sounds obvious and rudimentary, but the thought process of the filmmaker says, if I make a really great movie, it shouldn't matter who's in it. It shouldn't matter what the cast is. If they deliver good performances, it should talk for itself. But we definitely see that being able to spend more money on name recognition cast, the people in the top, call it 10% of actors, it needs to be a priority for you to be able to get that market attention. And then also know who your market is. Are you making movies for a genre audience? We played some really amazing genre film festivals, and we were diet horror to them. They were like, this isn't a horror film whatsoever. And then, a CineQuest, when we were there, the two people sitting beside or behind me, I could hear them whispering saying, this is way too scary.
Or we'd hear from people that they're watching the whole thing through splayed fingers.
So it's really understanding the market while you're going in. And we were very fortunate to have partnered with XYZ early on, which, they're tastemakers in the genre industry. And what would have been helpful for us at the time was for them to give us notes, either whether it was script level or the first edit, saying, this isn't genre enough, this is not scary enough for how we're planning on selling it. So being able to be vulnerable and creative and being willing to take feedback early on from critical tastemakers,
even if it's not feedback you want to hear.
Yeah, a part of the problem with producing your own movie is that you're the one that needs to talk to yourself. And this is our second film. It's difficult to take your own advice sometimes. And even though there's two of us, we got on the page so well together that we weren't really looking at things objectively enough. So while you're writing and while you're developing something to be produced, now we have that experience. And also, what we're looking for is, whether it's an executive producer or a mentor or a tastemaker in the industry, to bring someone in that's specific to what we're doing, who can speak to the market. Because ultimately, you can make a great film and you can go tour festivals and maybe you'll make your money back, maybe you won't, and you might be able to. In Canada, we're subsidized with telefilm and tax credits. But if you want to do it again and you want to do it better, you have to perform to the market. The market has to respond well to your movie. So that's definitely something that we're looking at a little bit differently this time around.
Yeah, it's so important. And we've had this conversation multiple times on this podcast and just, privately with other filmmaking friends. Right now, you really just have to think of the market and distribution at the development stage and make sure that you're, laying the piping for what is eventually going to be a marketing campaign and making sure that you're building the assets and that the entire thing is of a whole and that it's consistent and which direction you're going and who your audience is, also building your audience getting the buzz out there. And because like we don't have the budget of a major studio to market these movies, right? So whatever we can do early on and not do it at the end when we're exhausted after shooting this movie and just being like, okay, now we're going to talk about marketing and distribution. And you're like, I just spent years putting this together. I'm exhausted. Can't somebody else do it? Well, no, it's our job as filmmakers to do that at the beginning and keep it going. Right now, I mean, I'm looking at like bringing in a producer of marketing and distribution of just at the development stage, so that it's like we're going to focus on development and pre-production and production. You guys are working at the same time. We'll have weekly meetings, but you're thinking of what's going to happen 8 months from now, and let's start having those discussions. And what assets do we have to get, right? What meetings do we have to set now in order to be ready for later?
And where is it going to go? I think that's such an important part of the process. Is what are your aspirations for the film, and who's going to see it? How are they going to see it? The market's continuing to evolve every single day. From the moment that we started writing this movie to where we are right now, the industry and the market have shifted tremendously. And we never thought that we would have a theatrical run the way that we did. I think in Canada, we played 14 theaters.
Yeah, I think 14 cities, and that's regular runs at all those.
Yeah.
Definitely exceeded our
So
expectations.
what is that, like a 2-week run or like a 1 week? Or
Depends on the city.
Yeah, Prince Rupert ran 6 weeks. And obviously that was where we shot the movie, and there was a lot of buzz amongst the town.
Cineplex just kept holding it over, and we weren't even sure if they were going to program it in the first place.
Like 3 screenings per day type of thing?
Yeah.
Or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Every day.
Yeah. In Vancouver, I believe we had 3 weeks of runs here.
At International Village here.
Kelowna held over for 2 weeks. So we were kind of like a traveling band a little bit with the film. Our distributor and our booker were really, really great at finding, we shot in a remote town. So our focus was theaters in smaller towns.
Yeah, Salmon Arm, Williams Lake, Fort Nelson, Terrace.
And
Cool.
Our U.S. distributor, they were able to put it into New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, Detroit, Minneapolis. So we weren't anticipating this theatrical release when we shot it. I mean, you shoot a movie to be seen in theaters. That was a big part of the way that we shot it. That's the way that we want to see it. Of course, some people are going to watch it on their iPhones on the train to work, but we shot it. We mixed it for theatrical release, and when it got there, we were really happy for that. But that ultimately, that money that was made, and fortunately we made some money on our theatrical release, which was great. That was never our intention. Our intention was to get it released to the places where audiences are going to be able to see it. So in Canada, we mitigated that early on with financing it and getting Super Channel on board and bringing the CMF in and leaning on our tax credit. So in Canada, we kind of knew we were taken care of, but then it's about placing your film with a great international sales agent. It's about getting a distributor in the US that's going to be able to find that market for it. So when you're taking those first steps early on, yes, and I think it's a great point. The money that we're spending on marketing now is just coming out of our pockets. And again, of course, we went well over budget. And so any kind of tax credit overages or any additional money, like we didn't get paid all of our producer fees. We reinvested those producer fees back into the movie. The corporate overhead wasn't maxed out. So when you start to look at how your budget's coming together, you have to make the movie, but at the end of it, you have to be able to spend money to market it so people can find it. Because again, you can get put out through a distributor, and it's now their decision what happens, whatever your distributor. Our Canadian distributor was a little bit differently because we have a long relationship, but eventually if you're working with the right people, they're going to be making decisions without you. And so if they're not going to spend the money marketing it, you have to do that. And there's a lot of clever ways to do it. I don't know if we're building our own audience or creating an audience that knows who Austin and I are, but the industry is going to take note of the kind of movies that we're making. So the next conversations to try to build the next movie are going to be a lot easier. And that's one of the ways that we looked at this whole process, is saying, yes, we want audiences to see our movie, of course, but we also want our peers to be able to recognize the movie, what we're able to do. So when we're trying to attach a bigger cast member or talk to studios or mini studios and convince them that they should get a part of our project, we have something to point at. And that was a big step for us. This journey is different for everyone. And this is our second film working together. This was a really big step for us to go from $150,000 to, a $3 million telefilm regional movie. That was a big step. And we want to continue to make the next steps. But to do that, we knew we had to make a film that our peers would respect and program into film festivals and watch the screeners and be willing to have those meetings with us afterwards.
Would you ever, maybe for your next one, depending on the budget level, consider more of a hybrid approach as far as like self-distribution or working with a distributor based on like the landscape that's out there or the deals? Or did you enjoy this process of making the film and bringing the distributor in early, and then having them take it over?
My perspective, and I can probably speak for both of us here, is I want everything done in advance. And so for the documentaries that we do, the budgets are lower, so the risk is mitigated by our producers a lot better. But everything in Canada is pre-sold and it's done, and then we'll end up selling it. So our last, I think, 4 documentaries have sold to Universal Studios, which is great. You get the Universal arm behind it, and they're spending, you look at their cost reports, and I think we're still in the red on 2 projects that broke records for them. So it's great on one hand to have Universal give us an MG, and that covers our investors, and everyone makes a little bit of money, and then they start promoting it like crazy, which is really great. And there's something inherent in me that I want that deal done before we start shooting, because it's one less level of stress that you need to worry about of going and selling it. And I personally think this is like a very, negative approach, but I think putting private equity into movies right now, the way that the market is in advance, is really foolish. It's not responsible to expect that someone's going to buy your movie anymore, because the buyers are so small, and it's streamers, and the streamers are really creating their own projects. So why are they going to take a flyer on your movie where they may have a ton of creative notes? You're now essentially saying that, hey, someone's going to like what we're doing, but they're going to have no say in the creative process.
Well, and that's just happened in the time between when we were putting this together and when we brought in private equity.
Yeah.
And then, that private equity, because it took a while for the film to get finished, for us to find traction at festivals and the rest. That's the point where the bottom sort of gave out on the market. And, I love the word that Andy used before about it evolving. It's not necessarily inherently worse. It's just going through weird metamorphosis right now.
Sure.
But, that period where the market evolved so much between even when we shot the film and when we released it, that left our private money quite exposed.
Yeah, it's about looking at being responsible with it. So, if you have maybe like a crowdfunded campaign, and regardless of what your budget is, what you're trying to do is you're trying to create something that can get you to the table, to the decision makers that can finance your movie in advance. That's one less thing to worry about. So for us, that was starting with Lord Jones and then going to a telefilm movie. And we're so fortunate in Canada to have telefilm that supports independent filmmakers. We could have made our movie with way less private equity. We wouldn't have had the same product on the screen, but because of telefilm, they give filmmakers voices and chances to make movies. In the US, that's very, very different. They don't have this taxpayer-funded equity model that we do here. And now, so I'm looking at it saying, okay, if we had to do a movie, say our next movie doesn't get off the ground because it's a little bit more ambitious and it still requires a bunch of money, we could go make $1 million movie or a $2 million movie with the resources that are available to us, and try to use that to get a seat at the table again, being responsible with the money that you have. And filmmaking isn't dictated by how much money you're spending making the movie. If you have a low budget, you have this massive floor to ceiling ability to market a movie that, what was the Edmonton movie that did so well?
Skinamarink.
Skinamarink.
$11,000 budget.
A great example. They made a movie regardless of what the budget was, but because they weren't exposed, they could take some risks and chances with it, and it paid off for them. I think it really depends on what are your aspirations? What are you trying to do? But looking to be your primary source to finance a movie in advance in this current market, my opinion is, don't start with private equity. Don't start by trying to take other people's money and building a model that's going to ultimately probably right now fail, where you can say, hey, go do the difficult things, go to markets, go meet people, bang on doors of the industry, and try to have those conversations to see, hey, maybe we can get a co-production going where we're going to get a certain amount of money out of this province or out of this country, or we're going to talk to a sales agent and they're going to help us attach a bigger cast member who's going to afford us a bigger advance that's going to go into our budget to make it. So looking at all the avenues of traditional filmmaking, and a part of that is who you know. And that's why networking, right. I don't like doing it. I don't like having to go and try to meet someone, find out if I can trust them or what that relationship's going to be like. But it's so necessary, because the more doors that you open, the better chance that you have of getting your movie financed. And right now, it's like, hey, we all need to try to navigate what's going on in our industry. Things are changing, and there's news last week of how it's going to continue to change for us Canadians in the industry, and how are we going to adapt to that? But this all being said, if you can continue to point to things to people to bring you to the table to have those conversations, you're going to have a better chance at not failing after your movie's made. Making the movie's one thing, marketing it and selling it is a completely other. And I don't necessarily think it speaks to the quality of your film. I think it speaks to a lot of other elements that are outside of our control as filmmakers.
I guess the idea here is in terms of taking agency of your own career, like your guys' career progression in terms of taking agency of it. A lot of that comes down to getting the resources to make the film, making the film, using that as a calling card-ish sort of thing of like proof that we can make films, but not only that we make films, but we make good films, we make entertaining films or interesting films that the market likes, and taking that out. And is that sort of like how you guys see taking agency of your own career? Because the other way to look at it is to say that we're going to ask someone to just pick us.
Yeah, it's never going to happen. Someone's
Exactly.
not just going to be like, "Hey, you guys, we like your face. Go make a movie." I kind of think that goes to what we were speaking about is like try to go earn yourself a spot at the table to have those conversations. And if you don't do it, how is it ever going to happen? So it
Right.
goes into like just go make that movie, regardless of what scale it's at, and try to continue to build on what that is. And career wise, I think you have to look out for yourself in such a big way. And for us, it's been about trying to get validation from those people that are going to help us make those relationships. And
Yeah, well, the support and seeing how, they see things the same way that we do. So yeah, so much of it is that sort of, chess game of, as you bring up, Anthony, the what it takes to get the next one made. What does this one stand for in the broader career perspective? So much of it too is just the act of making the thing and the act of, being able to tell the story and find recognize that the movie itself has value, but one doesn't really exist without the other. And to that point of hoping for the chance or working for the chance. I mean, like I think of like Zach and Adam having done Freaks and then
Yeah,
pitching
great
to
example.
do Final Destination 6. And they had such an amazing pitch that, that was very, very clearly what helped them level up. So you see that on one side, but then you see like my friends who did the movie Summer of '84, where they ended up spending so many years putting together pitches that their representation had put them up for big studio movies. And they would kill themselves spending weeks doing their vision for how they would do that. And they were, pitching alongside, 6 or 8 other teams. And one of those teams or 2 of those teams had an inside track that they didn't have. And,
Right.
I think how much that becomes, and screenwriters are used to going through this too. Yeah. And actors doubly or triply so.
Yeah.
Auditioning for, and because now it's self tapes and casting directors can see 1,000 tapes instead of seeing 20 people in the room, your chances are so much smaller than they used to be.
Well, Zach and Adam are a great example of the Freaks and everything else that they had been working on, because they've done, other projects aside from that, gave them the opportunity to be considered for that movie and to take advantage of that opportunity. And you look at those decision makers, they're no different than us as producers on our own movie. So when we're looking at a director of photography or a key grip or a key makeup artist, we're looking at their body of work beforehand and how they talk about it and their ability to deliver and make their lives easy. We zoom out a little bit further and they're saying, okay, well, these are the filmmakers. I can look at their last film and say, yeah, they finished this. They got it done in a way that worked, and we're going to put our faith in the fact that they can spend our money in a way that can make a movie. And that's ultimately our job, is to convince someone else that we're capable of doing what we want to do. And it's interesting because, Anthony, you say career, and it's like, I don't have a problem with phrasing it that way, because unfortunately, I think like I'm not looking to go get hired to do something or someone to hire me. I'm looking at it as this is the thing that I do. Unfortunately, a large part of my identity is filmmaking. I kind of look at it as like that personal validation and what we're doing as people looking at us as filmmakers, saying, yeah, we can do this. And, I'm not saying I'm not going to direct television. I'd love to direct episodes of television, but right now the focus is getting our own films made and continuing to make them bigger and better and more widely seen. But you kind of have to play this game of, how do you get people to see your movies? We're not making movies just for ourselves. That's a focus of saying, make a movie that you'd like to watch. But ultimately, you want as many people to watch your movie as possible and for them to be commercially successful. It's a part of my goal anyways.
Yeah, I've rephrased that idea of making the movie you'd want to watch to more making a movie in a genre that you want to watch, because I think it's like you have to be interested in the type of movie you're making. I want to watch a movie in a genre that I love, that probably I share with a lot of other people.
Yeah, and I think that's just a smart approach to the market. Going back to saying, like, what are people watching? When we were at CineQuest, we had the the amazing experience to watch a Buster Keaton movie.
Our
cool.
hospitality. What an amazing experience with a live organist who was brought in, like the top organist in the States.
I honestly, I don't know if I've had an experience like that before because my expectations were so low. But
We were howling the whole
1,000
time.
people in the theaters were laughing just as hard as we were at this movie that was made so long ago.
Yeah.
And it was a completely different thing, but doesn't mean that I'm going to go and try to make a silent film with a bunch of visual gags. We can take inspiration from that and we will continue to do so. But, ultimately you have to look at what is the marketplace consuming right now and adapt to that. Because if you don't, you're going to have a really tough time finding an audience for it to watch a movie.
Does this sort of like thought process, do you think like it's sort of universal, or is this like, how would you adapt this in this Canadian landscape? I mean, we have telefilm. Is that sort of an unfair advantage that maybe a Canadian filmmaker has over, say, an American filmmaker? Because the private equity side is what the American indie filmmaker is almost always relying on.
It's the biggest cheat code that we could possibly have as Canadian filmmakers is this group that are offering favorable deals to finance your movies where you don't need a lot of other elements involved to go forward. It's incredible. Telefilm is, like literally a gift that, and it's very competitive and as it should be. And they do a good job of trying to spread the money around and giving filmmakers voices.
And for particular projects too. Like I think of even a friend of ours who was in for telefilm recently too and was told, and we had a variation of this with Trustfall, this film doesn't need telefilm, that this film is, will get made without it because it's market friendly enough that it can, rise above. And, what message does that send? I've been trying to understand that myself too, but recognizing that telefilm's place is largely to uplift the types of stories that don't get platformed otherwise, or the types of filmmakers and voices that may not otherwise have an opportunity. And, especially early career that way, that's where regional is so helpful.
And where we have telefilm, like Screen Australia, how many times you're at a festival and you see an amazing movie that's produced by Screen Australia. So there's other countries that have programs that are similar, which is fantastic. Yeah. And as an American filmmaker goes, they have a little bit easier access, especially if you're in Los Angeles or New York, you have easier access to decision makers, but it's a real grind. There's a lot of people, I can't remember the number of movies that are made, feature films that are made every year, but it's a jungle out there to go and get your movie financed, and however you can do it, go and do it. But who doesn't want to work with A24 right now? They're a mini studio that's making money and they get eyeballs on their movies. And so you can't just walk up to A24's offices and bang on the door and say, hey, I'm a filmmaker. Do you guys want to give me money? So
that's what I'm doing wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. It's navigating this industry that, very understandably has gatekeepers in place all over the place. And the one best way to get over the gate and get those answers is make a movie that people are paying attention to, and however you can do that. And I think another nice thing about, filmmaking in Canada is we have all of these soft money sources, and the tax credits are a big part of that. And the Canadian Media Fund is a big part of that. And telefilm is a part of that. But then you go and look at, the Northern Ontario Heritage Fund, where if you shoot Northern Ontario, they're going to give you a bag of money to go shoot up there. Josh was just telling me about Newfoundland has a equity source that's taxpayer funded as well. That's out there that you can access if you're working with Newfoundland producers. Being open to going to markets and meeting filmmakers from other countries who are looking for good projects to do a co-production with. Are they able to bring money to your project? And I think when you're starting to look at financing a movie, your very first step should be, okay, what are our soft money sources that don't have to be paid back that we can either interim finance? What relationships do I have to bring that first key block to it? And for us, very fortunately, our first key block was a chunk of private equity of people that believed in us, that we were able to use that to entice the other bit. But, if you're able to go to Canadian markets, I would suggest everyone go to the Banff Media Festival, where the broadcasters are going to be at, and meet programmers from Bell and Super Channel, and be able to talk to them. And then all of a sudden you have a Super Channel pre-sale in place for X amount of money. But that X amount of money also triggers your tax credits at this point. So now you have two elements that could represent a third of your budget already in place before you're going to telefilm or before you're going to American partners. And, there's nothing the Americans love more than putting Canadian subsidies into their budgets and saying, hey, yeah, like we're going to give you $1 million, but we're going to get a $3 million movie out of the deal. That's incredible. And so I think you kind of have to look at like what pieces can you bring forward, and one piece that every single filmmaker, no matter who you are, can bring forward is your sweat equity. So that means, not writing a first draft of your script and thinking it's done. Write it, rewrite it, get pay for coverage, give it to your friends, get notes, make that as tight of a script as you possibly can that you're really proud to bring to industry professionals. Then do all of the work afterwards. Where are you going to shoot it? What are the curveballs you're going to come to when you're doing it? What is your visual language going to be? Meet with cinematographers in advance or production designers. Come together with
put together your own pitch deck. Put together locations packages, put together, all of these things that can elucidate your vision. Because that's the other thing. You're also battling with the number of producers who will be interested in a project and say, oh, hey, well, I can see that there's a movie here, but you are a liability if you want to direct it. Well, you have to fight for your chance to actually be able to accomplish or see through your own vision if you're looking to do anything more than just pay for it out of, your own line of credit or credit card.
On Island Between Tides, we were told very seriously by a very close friend of ours who's an executive producer that's produced hundreds of movies that we should just write this movie and allow another director to be attached, and that would garner a bigger cast and a bigger budget, and that would help our building blocks as writers.
And they had a whole path to make it that way too, that they pitched us.
And we have another close friend that's an executive producer that's saying, like, you guys shouldn't just get stuck on trying to develop your own movies to direct. You should be selling movies as writers. And yes, it's definitely a path going forward, but there's a lot of writers out there that are also pitching scripts, and we want to tell the stories that we're doing. That's our path. So I think a part of it is understanding, like, what do you want to do and how do you want to do it, and making that decision and going forward with it, and buying in on yourself. Like Austin said, I think the pitch decks are such a good way to be able to get what you're trying to do across. And those are really helpful. And everyone does a pitch deck for a movie now, but have a production plan. Have all of the questions that a really skeptical producer or financier is going to ask you, and have answers to those. Because the moment that you don't have those answers, you're now unproven and they don't know if you can deliver. So have your production plan figured out well in advance before you go into a meeting, because I personally never want to have an answer to a question that's being asked, or at least a good answer to a question that's being asked, because they're going to be able to read you and tell if you're ready or not to make this movie.
If you're a liability as a director, for example, like if a perceived liability, it's being over prepared and over delivering on the other side of the
make up for your disadvantage.
I've already, I've storyboarded the entire first sequence that is so complicated, and I've already storyboarded it. And
here, let me walk you through it and get you excited about it.
Yeah. But also on the independent side, as a director, I think you need to know the budget and the finance plan just as well as you do the script and the story. Like, you need to be able to jump back and forth and talk about each document as if it was memorized, as if you know it like the back of your hand. And that's ultimately the difference between, being an indie director versus a director for hire on a studio movie, where like you come in, you're the director. There's a team of producers handling the other stuff that you're going to be consulting with, but on the indie side, you're the CEO.
I agree on the indie side, but I also agree on the studio side, because if you don't have an understanding of how budget works and how money is being spent, they're not going to be able to understand the scope of what you're doing. So everyone wants to work with a studio. Don't get me wrong. That's a dream. I would love for a studio to come forward and say, we'd like to do your next movie. But one of the reasons why they would like to work with us is the fact that we produced Island Between Tides and we know how money works. So, hey, we have this great shot. I'll tell a story of one of the dreams that we had for Island Between Tides was to have a techno crane at the island, so we could do shots of Lily going across. And, we found out that we were able to get a helicopter and helicopter a crane in and crane out, and logistically it was fine. And if that's what the hill that we were going to die on, that we needed it, that probably would actually ruined our island day, because we wouldn't be able to move the crane in and out to be able to turn around quickly and hide it. But that money being spent on that crane would have taken away from money elsewhere on the project that we were already thin on. So understanding the budget and understanding what the realities of spending money is and where that money gets spent is really, really important.
Or I think of even that moment where Telefilm told us that they would be able to come in with an extra, X number of dollars. And you and I got together very excitedly, and we were like, ooh, that money could go here and it could go there, and they can bolster that scene, and we'd be able to do that thing that we talked about that we thought. And then we took that plan to Amber and Matthew, and they're like, oh, no, that money's already been allocated to originals elsewhere. You don't get to have any of these things. So okay.
That covers the stuff you didn't think about.
Yeah.
This has been an amazing discussion. This has been super fun and informative, and I feel like we can probably go for another hour and a half. Maybe we'll have to bring you back, especially when you're further along in your next project and we can talk about development.
Love this chat, guys.
But normally we ask our guests like one piece of advice that you can give an up and coming filmmaker. I feel like the last 10 minutes was that advice. Like there's so many great things. Go back and listen to it. But if there's anything else you want to share before we wrap up.
I think the biggest thing for me is be ready to take advantage of the opportunities that are given to you. So that means working in the service industry, making films, being able to understand what's going on. Because if you don't have the work experience and the experience to take advantage of an opportunity, it's going to go by you. You're not going to be able to use it. So do all the things, work the craft. Austin and I have both worked jobs inside the industry that necessarily we didn't want to do, but I've spent days dressing sets. I spent days as a locations assistant. I spent days doing sound recording. Do all of those things, especially if you want to be a director, and learn all of the different crafts that are happening on set so you're better with them. And then when you're in those meetings, you can speak to it. And I think that's such an important part, is just learn how to make movies. And the best way to learn how to make movies is by working on other people's stuff.
Yeah. Well, and to look inward too, and to recognize that, do you need to do this? Do you have a burning desire to put up with all of the shit all of the time in the effort to try to, like, I'll speak for myself here. I'm not really very good at anything else. I'm very good at this, at all the different parts of this, especially, I think of especially working editor. And because I don't really have a fallback, everything relies on this working out. And so because all of my eggs are in this one basket, the stakes are very high. And I recognize that I have to do everything that I can to succeed. And if that sounds like you, then you know that you just have to do this. You have this compulsion, this drive to dedicate, even in the face of what seem like insurmountable odds, or things that seem to defy logic and reason. And your significant other, your parents are telling you, well, why don't you just go and be an accountant? If that sounds like you will make it and you will be fine. Stick with it for long enough, and be genial and competent, and you'll make it.
And if you want to be an accountant, you can also be an accountant in the film industry too. So there
you
go.
Sure can. Yeah. And they are worth their weight in gold.
They're worth everything. Yeah.
We love and are so grateful to our accountant, Virginia.
Guys, thank you so much. This has been a blast. We look forward to the next one.
Yeah, thanks for having us, guys.
We really appreciate it. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, guys.
Okay, so that's it for this week's episode of Off the Lot. We want to hear from you. If there are any topics you want covered or any questions you'd like answered, please email us at podcast.offthelot@gmail.com.
You can also find us on Instagram and YouTube. Our handles are in the show notes. Be sure to like, follow, and subscribe. And share this with your friends. See you next week.